All right, everyone, thank you for tuning in. My name is Stephanie Schrader, and I am the Education Outreach and Diversity Managing Director for C-DEBI. This webinar series is presented by C-DEBI, and we are focusing on professional development skills needed both in and out of academia. The series is held every other month, so please stay tuned for our next seminar that will be in October. Today's speaker is Dr. Karen Lloyd. She is an assistant professor of microbiology at the University of Tennessee, and she will be talking today about how to negotiate in academia and why it is a crucial component to the job offer. Before we start, I will go through a couple webinar reminders and tips. You will be muted during the talk, so if you have a question, please use the chat box. We will occasionally interrupt Karen with any questions that you have, so please use the chat box to submit your questions. And also, this webinar is being recorded and will be put on the C-DEBI page after it is done. So with that, I will turn it over to Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, so I want to start by saying that I am not probably the most qualified person to be giving you advice on how to negotiate in academia. Just full disclosure, I am an assistant professor. I've been a part of a couple of hiring rounds, and of course I went through the process myself, but I'm not super senior, so just take that with what it is. But I actually had a really excellent introduction to how to do this when I was a graduate student at the University of North Carolina. So I will attempt to pass along to you a lot of what they told to me, which I found to be very useful. And this is all about academia. Sorry, that's the only industry I know. So other folks will have to talk about the private sector. But advancing. What I'm going to cover is just talking about tenure track jobs. Of course, you can negotiate at the PhD offer level and also at the postdoc offer level. These are places where you can negotiate. However, the people who are able to give you something more than what they originally offered you are often not in a position to actually do that, because a lot of times your position is written into a grant and they don't have much leeway for salary and things like that. So usually the negotiation is really only an issue for a tenure track job, although there can be other places too. So I'm going to start with talking about getting an interview, and then I'm going to go over getting an offer and then negotiating your offer. Because when I sat down to just talk about negotiations, I realized that that's not the hardest part, right? The hardest part is getting an offer. So I thought that those were important things to touch on as well. So my short list of pieces of advice for getting an interview at a tenure track job is, of course, the number and quality of your papers matter. Just publish. It's really important. And there at least were a lot of I've heard a lot of sentiment of I'm never going to get a job because I haven't published a first authored paper in Science or Nature or PNAS or something really high profile in my discipline. And I'm proof that is not true. I did not have any of these things when I landed my job, and I know lots of other people who did not have this. So this is not a requirement, and don't think yourself less attractive to universities because of this. And networking is, of course, really important. This is certainly something that you've heard of before, but I can't stress how important it is with anything, getting grants, job offers, anything. When you are writing to someone and presenting yourself on paper, if that person also knows you in person, it makes a difference, because they have a whole person to put behind what's on paper. And so that's the kind of stuff that you just can't replicate in any other way. So knowing people is really advantageous. And then your cover letter has to be great. When you are applying for a tenure track job, you're in a pool of hundreds of people. So someone is sifting through literally hundreds of cover letters, and usually they're not going to read the whole package. They're not going to crack open your CV at the first glance. They're going to just read the way you present yourself. And I will swallow my pride and show you guys my crappy cover letter that I started out with. So this is, and I've redacted the names of who I was actually writing to and where I was applying because that's super inappropriate. But I can expose my own weak underbelly to you all because that is my that's my prerogative. So first of all, make sure your letter is professional. Put it on the letterhead of the place where you are. Don't just make it on a Word document. So it should look something like this, like mine. I was doing a postdoc at the Center for Geomicrobiology. So this is what I sent out. You know, I'm saying, I want to be a professor in your department, and I want to create this vast, diverse, wonderful research program that is going to make your university proud. And this is how I presented to myself. Dear Dr. So-and-so, I am applying for the faculty position in blah, blah. I obtained my PhD with this lovely person at this lovely place in this other place in this year. I'm now working in a postdoc with this other guy who's lovely in this lovely place. I am working on linking microorganisms to biogeochemical functions. My approach integrates some stuff. That part's maybe not so bad. Go to my website if you want more details. And I'm going to be, if you happen to be at AGU, I'll be at AGU. This is not the kind of letter that gets attention. This is a pretty sucky letter. And in fact, I did not get an interview at the job that I sent this to. I was not in the interview pool. And I discovered this when I was at a meeting with a friend of mine who I don't see very often. And she said, let me look at your cover letter. And so I gave it to her, and she just looked at it, and she's like, this is horrible. I would never give this person a second look. This is the most boring thing. So she said, let me rewrite it for you. And so I was like, be my guest. So I'll show you what she wrote, which is a way better letter, but it kind of makes me cringe because it is so self-aggrandizing. It's not the way I talk about myself. But these are not just colloquial ways that we talk about ourselves. This is how we actually have to convince someone that we're all that in a bag of chips. And the way you do that is, I'm not saying this is the only way. This is my spiffed up cover letter that she wrote for me and I used. And this is actually, I guess I redacted all the names, but I'll tell you that I sent this to my current job. So this is the cover letter that I sent here. So I'm applying for this job. I researched the biogeochemical functions of all these different types of things. I plan to use cutting edge single cell techniques, which maybe sounds silly to a lot of us now because a lot of us use that technique. But this was in, I believe, 2010. So this is before we had actually done single cell genomics in marine sediments. And we weren't quite sure if it worked yet, but we were working on it. In concert with massively parallel DNA sequencing technologies, which again sounds so dumb because that's what everybody does right now, but it was maybe a little cooler back then. But I'm overcoming major limitations of traditional environmental microbiology. You know, the ability to resolve the functions of thousands of microbial species contained in bulk samples. And I say I was able to make breakthroughs and challenging paradigms. And then my last paragraph is saying I would like the paragraph saying, you specifically, the place I'm applying to, I have looked at you and I would fit in well with what you do. And I think that I could bring something specifically to you guys. I'm not just a general call. I think it's very important. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on how to write an impactful cover letter. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of a cover letter because that is your only foot in the door. So make it be really, really good and catch people's eye with it. Do anybody have any questions about getting an interview? Published a lot of papers. Impress them. Jesse has a question.
Oh, someone is typing.
Yeah. Jesse's typing a lot. Is cover letter really the first thing sifted through? I guess that doesn't, yeah. So the question is cover letter really the first thing sifted through? It totally depends on who's doing the sifting, right? We all have different ways of approaching a bunch of applicants whenever we have to deal with an applicant pool. Some people have their favorite thing to pull up, but I do know that a lot of people look at the cover letter first. It's how people present themselves. Okay, so unless there's another question, the next step, if you get an interview, first of all, know, and sorry if everybody sort of already knows this, but if you get an interview for a tenure track job, you have passed the biggest hurdle. This is really, really good news. You're very close to getting the job, so treat it as such. Know that you should take it very seriously at this point. One thing that I have heard people do a lot when they're practicing job talks, which just strikes me as something that is not a good thing, is that they'll say, and here's the section of work that I did when I was a PhD student, and here's the section that work that I did in my first postdoc, and here's the section of work I did in my second postdoc. That is not in my opinion, that's not the best way to present yourself as performing a continuous line of research where you see the thread linking all these various things that you've done together. You've done the work. Yeah, you did it as a PhD student. You don't need to hide that fact. If somebody asks that, you're like, yeah, this is something I did when I first started out. But in terms of how you present yourself in the job talk, include everything you did as a PhD student, as long as it impinges on what you're doing now. And feel free to own that. Don't be so concerned with labeling it as sort of like a caveat. And the other thing is to be really interested in the research of the people in the department. I mean, this is true in general when networking is people really want to talk about their own research. I mean, this is what I tell students who are feeling nervous at a conference, like, how do I talk to people? How do I even get into a conversation? You can always go up to any researcher and say, what is it that you research? And if you ask enough sort of leading questions, they will just tell you, because who won't do, I do that. I love it. I love it when people ask me about my research. I love to talk about it. So you will be, the interview day is a series of meeting after meeting after meeting, where you're meeting individually, usually with faculty in the department. And they will basically be telling you about their research, and they'll be asking you about yourself. I don't think you have to do a lot of research into what they do. You don't need to come in already knowing each one of their canon of literature, but asking, like, and I guess I sort of have, I might figure out how to share this with Matt so he can disseminate this. I got a nice list of questions that you can ask as you're on your interview. Like, you can ask, what is the research environment like at this university? What are you looking for in an assistant professor? Asking before you get there, you might want to ask what the composition of the audience is going to be like. Is this focused more on one small aspect of what you do, or in terms of the people who are going to be there, or is it a very broad audience? And then you can ask, what their tenure rate is. How often are people denied tenure in this department, and how has that gone down for them? And also asking lots of questions about what it's like to live there, what the city's like, cost of living, things like that. All these questions are good questions that you can ask when you're on an interview. And questions that you can expect to be asked when you're on an interview would be just blanket, tell me about your research. So have your elevator pitch practiced and good, so that it sounds nice and natural at the moment. But have that queued up and ready to go, because you're going to be giving it a lot. It is totally fair for them to ask, where else do you have interviews? And tell them. Do you have other offers? And what do you want to teach? Think about what classes you'll be wanting to teach. And then where do you see your research in the next 5 or 15 years? And we've had applicants come in and be very pointed and say, I have this grant that I'm thinking about doing, and this other grant that I'm thinking about doing, and this other one. And then other people are more like, well, this area of research is going to be appropriate for this funding agency, so I'm thinking of going there with this. Either way is actually fine, but just to give the impression that you really are going to be able to hit the ground running. And don't neglect yourself, your body, when you are on an interview. Bring bottled water. It's tough. It's actually really grueling if you've never done something like this before. you are getting dragged from person to person to person. And like, if you have to go pee, you're going to have to ask somebody to like let you have a moment to go pee. That's how intense it is. You know, have mints in your pocket if that makes you, like, whatever you need as a security blanket. I chew gum, so I needed to bring gum with me. Make sure you have a backup of everything. Have your a USB drive with your talk on it, so that you know, if everything fails, you've got that USB stick. And of course, think about what you wear. Make sure it's comfortable. That's the last thing, you know, because normally we don't dress up like we would for an interview. So don't just don't wear something for the first time, because then you'll be so concerned about whether, you know, your shirt's coming out of your pants or something. Stephanie asked, how much time should you dedicate to thinking about how to collaborate with people in your potential department? I think that the question of how much interaction you need to have with current people is unfortunately different in different departments. But in general, I would say, in talking to people from other departments, they don't want someone who's going to be an island alone. You need to have some sort of crossover, but you need to not replicate the main function of other people in the department. When I entered my department, there was no one working in the benthos. There was no one working in the sediments at the bottom of oceans or any aquatic environment. So that was probably helped me out a lot. So emphasize the parts that are really distinct from what's happening in the department already, but make it clear that you would love to use your skills, your unique skills that they don't already have, to fit like a puzzle piece to maybe solve some of their research questions. And also, spouses are a thing. So I had a spouse who was in research at the same time. So we're both doing everything together at the same times. And some of you may know him, Drew Steen. So I did not say anything about him during my interview, and you do not have to say anything about your +1 in an interview, and they're not supposed to ask. Although I got asked multiple times at some of my interviews. And some of them I told them, and other ones I was like, you're not supposed to ask that. But you don't have to tell them. And I've heard people advocate that you should even take off your wedding ring when you go to an interview, just so that they will evaluate you and your research and your ability to contribute to teaching and service without any extraneous factors. I thought that was too extreme, so I certainly owned up to having a husband and children. But that said, at some point, if you are moving towards an offer, you are going to need to tell them about this person who's also going to be looking for a job. So we did it a little unconventionally. It was in between. I had done the interview and I felt like it had gone well, but I didn't actually have an offer yet. And we went ahead and told them, which ended up being the right move, because it didn't cost me the job, and it allowed them, when they actually gave me my initial offer, they came in with the partner offer too at the same time, which was huge. Okay, so negotiating. Are there questions about getting an offer, doing a good job with the interview? You can send a follow-up email. That's right. After you leave, if you had a nice time, if you enjoyed talking to people, send a follow-up email saying specifically how much you enjoyed talking to them. But only if that's absolutely true, because otherwise it just looks like grubbing. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, then I will move on to negotiating. The number one thing to know about negotiating is that it is normal to negotiate. So don't worry about seeming like you're being, it's gonna make you look bad if you ask for more than you're being offered. Everyone negotiates. You're expected to negotiate. And this is, in fact, when I was learning this at UNC, I don't know where the statistics are, but they provided some great statistics that a lot of the pay gap between men and women is accounted for by the fact that women on average negotiate for less than men at the outset. So then every raise that you get is based on a percentage. And so that imbalance at the beginning sets women up for a really big gap after time. I don't know if that's true or not, but I took this to heart and I was like, I will not be a woman who does not negotiate. So I did. But it's important to know, man or woman, make sure you're polite. you don't want to burn bridges. This is not the time to play hardball with anyone. And I heard one dean say, basically, no one takes offense at you negotiating, even negotiating for something big, but just try not to be memorable. Just don't stick up. Don't do something so crazy that it sticks out in people's heads. I know of one negotiation where the building was situated in the middle of a city block, and there was just, there's no parking. It's a city block, and the person who was negotiating for an offer said, "I will not come unless I have a parking space at the next to the building." It's like, nobody has a parking space next to it. Like, that's not possible. And that was memorable. So I'll remember that person. Don't do that. Before I move on to the next sort of point in this PowerPoint, part of sort of the not being memorable thing is being really well educated. Know very well how much people make in this sort of job at your level at other places. And know how much they're getting in startup, because those are the things that you can come in and it may be that you get a really, really crappy offer, and you need to know if you have a crappy offer. And the way to find these things out are that you talk to recent postdocs in your lab who have gone through this, friends who might know this stuff, faculty in your own department if you're a graduate student or a postdoc who would be willing to share this stuff with you. These are, it's always a little touchy to talk about money with people, but just get over that and ask people how much they're making. So you can find out how much you should be making, because that's the only way that you can be educated about this. But so things that you can negotiate on, it's not just salary and it's not just startup. Well, actually, before I move on to other things, I wanted to say you should know also how the system works. Startup is, it's often on the order of a few $100,000. This is, or even more. This is a large sum of money for a university to just shell out in one lump sum. And until I got this job, it was a complete mystery to me where that money comes from. And I thought, how can they possibly afford to do this? It's so much money. Well, it comes through a couple of things, which I think I mentioned this when I'm talking about negotiations, because when you're asking for things, it's important to know what people have on their end, to educate yourself as much as possible about what they're hiding or what they could have. That money often comes from the fact that if the tenure line that's up for offer is it's the same line that's a very senior person retired from, then it's possible that senior person was making a lot more money than you'll be making when you come in. And so just that sort of pay cut from what a senior person makes in money that they set aside to continue paying that senior person, now that they've sort of made it a very junior position, they kind of have leftover money. So that goes in, that's where the money comes from for your startup sometimes. And another place that money comes from for startup is from overhead, from F&A, which is, sorry if you already know this, but in case you don't, when you write a grant at a university, you say, I write a grant to the NSF for $100,000. What I actually ask, and I need $100,000 to do my grant, to pay my graduate students, to go to sea, to do all my stuff. But I actually ask the NSF for about $200,000. And then half of that goes to my university. So my university's overhead is about 50%. So half of everything I get in grants goes to my university. So that pool of money is what's used to make startups for new hires. So in the back of your head, you can be thinking, that's what you'll pay back as you get grants with your overhead. You pay back the startup that you got. And as far as like how deep those pockets are, it all depends on how the university has structured the offer. But sometimes those pockets are actually deeper than they let on. So that's why you need to ask for more money. And other things that you can ask for besides just startup money and salary money are access to internal resources. So if there's an advanced computing facility or a high performance computing facility on campus, those are often places where you buy time. So they could give you time on the computer. And that's something the department could often negotiate for, because they don't have to come up with actual cash for it. They just need to ask a favor, which is sometimes easier. Or you could ask for DNA sequencing, or cell sorting, or measuring isotopes, like anything that goes in a user facility that's useful for your research. Those are things that you could get out of the university at no cost to you that are a good negotiating points. You could, depending on where you're going and what your research is, ship time is something that I've heard of people negotiating, or on a local vessel. And then of course lab space, negotiating for more area, which is that's probably one of your least fertile areas for negotiation, because lab space is usually very, very tightly allocated at the university, but you may find wiggle room in that. And in some cases, in places that have a very high cost of living, some places will offer you mortgage help. So getting something to help you make a down payment for very high housing costs is also something that they can do. So be creative in what you ask. You know, you may think of something that's specific to you that you could ask for. And as you ask for these things, make sure that your demeanor and that your purpose, you make it clear throughout that your purpose is about being successful in your research or your teaching. You're not asking for things as a land grab. You're asking for things because this is what you need in order to do the work that you need to do. I, for instance, was talking about, I was really excited about single cell sorting and single cell sequencing at the time, and I still am. But this is new, and I remember the department head at the time said, "All right, are you saying that you need us to come up with the whatever $500,000 or whatever to buy you one of these machines?" And I'm like, I don't need one of those machines, but if I needed to use it on a daily basis, then that would be something that I could say, yeah, I need you to buy me this huge machine, and we'll figure out some creative way to pay for it. So there are lots of things that you can negotiate for that's not just salary. Another thing is relocation budget. This is something that they should just come up with, that they should just tell you, we're giving you this much to relocate. But if they don't, make sure you ask for it. And then if you don't use all of your relocation budget, ask if you can roll over the leftover money from that pool into your startup, because just make sure people don't take it back, because they've already allocated that money. You should be able to put it in your startup. And ask how much of, or you need to ask how much of your salary will be paid. So like at most R1 universities, you get paid for 9 months, and then you're expected to cover the 3 months that you're not paid. Usually in your first couple of years, you can cover a few months of that from your startup. So ask and make sure that you can do that if that's what you want to do. And then you can also ask for another recruiting visit. So if they're serious about you, then if you have a family or if you have a partner, you might want to make a second visit and bring them out too, so they can start looking for houses, or start looking at schools, or start trying to think about how to employ your spouse. And you can also negotiate for teaching load. Most places will give you a teaching release. So I got 2 semesters of no teaching to help me set up my lab. That's something that you can, if that's not offered right at the outset, you can negotiate for that. You could maybe get a teaching release. And you can ask them also whether you can get a teaching release if you bring if you bring in a lot of research money. Oftentimes you can sort of buy out your months and teach less. So Stephanie was asking, who are you actually negotiating with? Upper administration, department chairs, etc. Great question. You are normally negotiating with the department chair, and that person is free to do some things, and then on other things they have to go and talk to the deans. That's sort of how the chain of command works. But that's usually that one person that you're dealing with as a department chair, as far as I'm aware. Maybe there's different ways of doing things that I don't know about. But another thing that's really important to know when you're negotiating, you have your greatest amount of power in between the point where you get an offer and you sign on the dotted line. I can't stress enough that once you sign on the dotted line, you have no standing to negotiate. So make sure you do all your haggling before you agree to come there and be a professor there. There was a really interesting anecdote in our workshop at UNC. They actually brought in a new assistant professor. He was in history, and he said, "I've been brought up as the bad example of how to negotiate poorly." He didn't ask for anything, and he signed on. He was so excited to have a job. He signed on the dotted line. He was living in California, and he had to move his whole family over to North Carolina. And he'd been living on barely no money. And they don't do postdocs, and he just had no extra money. And he realized he could not afford to rent a moving truck to get across the country. And the dean called him up, and he was like, "I'm just going to give you some money." It's like, you were supposed to negotiate for money to move to North Carolina, but you're so pitiful, we're just going to give you the money. So it was pretty cute. But don't do that. Be aware of what you need and ask for it. And know that their intention, whoever you're negotiating with, whether it's, especially if it's a department head, once they've decided that they want to hire you, they need you to succeed. So everybody is vested in you succeeding. So if you really make a case that you have to have a thing to succeed, they should find a way to make that happen. Let's see. I think I thought over most of the things that I thought about. Let's see. In negotiating, this is another question from Jesse. In negotiation communication, what's the format? Question. Emails back and forth, phone conversations, how many offer counter offers go back and forth? So those do not have universal answers for sure. It totally depends on your situation. Mine personally was that I got a phone call from the department head, and he congratulated me on, he was very upfront. He said, "You have this, we are offering this job to you." And he listed out salary, startup, the partner hire deal, teaching release, lab setup, how much they were going to give me to relocate. I think that's everything. He just listed out all the things. And since I'd done my homework, I knew that all of those were really good offers. He actually came in at the top on everything. And so I was of course floored and excited. And, you know, he said, don't make any comments about this now, but just, you know, those are all my cards. You have them, you know. I can't remember what he said. Let me know if you're still interested or something like that. Or I think I told him in the moment I was definitely interested. And then I negotiated with him in person on the second visit. That's when I negotiated with him. And my negotiations, I think I told you he came in with a really fabulous offer. My negotiations went like this. I said, I would like more salary. And he said, no. And I said, I would like more startup. And he said, no. I want more lab space. And he's like, no. Like, what do you want, Karen? Do you want a computer? And I said, yes. He's like, I'll buy a computer. Yes. So I may not be the best person to be giving this talk because I negotiated for just one computer. But all that said, I really, the reason why I was not able to negotiate is that they really were coming in with everything they had from the beginning. So it was still a very good deal. Which actually I have another point. Did they give you that list for your partner hire, salary, startup, etc.? Yes, all those things. Actually, that's not true. I did negotiate for the partner hire for a small amount of startup for him because he didn't have any startup associated with his position, and so I got a little bit for him. So that was actually something that I got. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention too. So of course, having multiple job offers is always better than having just one job offer. And if you have two competitive job offers, then you can get into a really good situation where they're bidding with each other and they don't want to lose you. Like once a place has decided that they want you, they're really going to try to get you. So that's a really good situation. Don't feel bad about it, and try to make it work out for you as best as you can. Again, you can do all this without just being greedy and just sort of land grabbing. You can see who will set you up for success in the best way. However, that said, even if you only have one job offer, you still negotiate because what you're negotiating against are the possibility of future job offers. Because if you got one, you can get another one, hopefully. Do you guys have other questions or things that you think I got totally crazy wrong? Other things that you might think are interesting to ask? Jesse says, full of good questions. How do you have any idea what's reasonable to ask in terms of startup? I'm sure you could justify any amount in terms of future productivity. Is it common to ask for 10% more, 100% more? How did you come to the impression that what they offered you was a good offer? Well, that good offer on their part. So that's about doing, that's the homework stuff I was talking about. So I had talked to all the folks I knew who had recently gotten job offers, and I knew exactly what they had gotten for startup. I mean, everybody told me exactly what they got. And I know that what I was offered was to a dollar amount, exactly what my postdoc friend had gotten at another university that was of similar caliber. And that's all. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it's not absolute. It's, you know, you can be successful with tiny amounts or big amounts, but if they need to bring it up to what other people are getting, then you can make that point very easily. Person typing. Let me see if there's anything I missed while that person's typing. You can negotiate for going away to field work. That's another thing that you can negotiate if you have to do a long field season somewhere. Could you elaborate some on the particular difficulties of partner hires? Do you apply where there are 2 jobs open or negotiate the second? I would not wait for 2 jobs to be open at once because that's rare, especially 2 jobs that apply to both of you. The way we did it, he was actually not applying to jobs because he was still getting some papers out, and I just got my papers out first. So I started applying for jobs, and what they gave him coming in was 3 years of funding as a research assistant professor, as a non-tenure track professor, and then after that he had to fund himself. And so he just, as soon as we got to Tennessee, just started writing grants and papers like crazy, and was successful in both grants and papers. And so it became clear to Tennessee, we actually didn't have to work very hard, but it became clear to Tennessee that they were going to lose us both if they didn't hire both of us. So they ended up doing that, which was great. To apply, yeah, I would apply to whatever jobs are open, even if there's only one. Like I said, once if a place decides they want you, they're gonna try to get you, plus your partner. Helps if your partner is awesome, like mine is. RS is typing. I won't be offended if you guys have to leave. Unless this is covered later, can you expand on which negotiating points are applicable to a postdoc? Yeah, I'm later. I've really said all that I could think of to say. Sorry, I went through it pretty fast, but I feel like people never mind a shorter lecture. For negotiating a postdoc, you can. It's just that oftentimes the postdoc salary is within a grant that they've written. So there really is no more money to play with. But you can negotiate for other things like relocation funding and things like that. I did. I asked for money to help move for my postdoc, and they granted it. but they're not going to put as much resources into negotiating at the postdoc level because you're not going to be around for as long. If that makes sense. And you're not going to be, when you start a tenure track job, the point of it is to sort of grow and expand and to bring in money, and you're going to be writing a lot of grants, and you're going to have a lot of output. You're going to have people making products, scientific products. So they're willing to put a lot of resources into starting that position up because it's going to have a lot of return. And a postdoc is more, there's a lot of return, but it's not coming from the university. You're negotiating then with the PI, who may have less resources behind them. But if they're a well-funded PI, they might be able to come up with whatever it is you need. I mean, I think the general principle of just being polite and asking for what you need applies to any level. Your friend colleague looked over and edited your cover letter to make it more eye-catching. Did you ask other friends colleagues to look over it? Did they give you the same advice? Are the cover letters that have made it through your department at the University of Tennessee gauntlet all of similar self-aggrandizing style? Maybe not. I mean, that's a good point. Maybe I shouldn't be telling y'all to write it like that. Maybe I was just lucky and mine got through. I really don't know. This is why I started with the caveat that I'm not a dean. Like, I haven't seen tons of hires go by. Yeah, it's a little anecdotal, so take it with a grain of salt. You do need to talk yourself up. This is not the time to be modest. We have more questions. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. I mean, again, it's just, my thoughts are just one data point among many, so I might be wrong about a bunch of stuff. I'm getting a question. Mike Roshan, good name, too, is typing. How fast will they come with an offer after the interview? That's a good question, too. You guys all have really good questions. That totally depends on whether you were the first person in a long series of people to interview or the last person, or whether, so, if they're starting on interviews that are lasting a few months, then it's going to be quite a while before you hear from them. It also depends on the internal politics of that university. In some cases, somebody told them that they were going to have 2 tenure lines, and then at the last minute, a dean decided to pull it, or a dean switched out and said, oh, I'm not supporting what the other dean said that they would do, and there's really only one position, and and then they haggle and they have to get 2 positions. So there could be quite a bit of time that passes after the interview. I think that if you haven't heard from them in like 3 or 4 months, I think it's acceptable to write an email and just say, where do you stand in your decision? I think that's just fine. Another way that I've heard of it happening is that you'll get invited back for a second interview without actually getting a job offer, which I think is crappy. I don't think that's nice, but I have heard of that happening. But I would assume if you're in that position, they're not going to invite you back if they're not interested in you. Silence is usually a bad thing. So if they're calling you back for whatever reason, you're on your way to a job offer. And you should consider at that point any discussions that you do about money or startup or anything as negotiations. You guys have more questions or thoughts? If nobody has any more thoughts, I'm happy to call it a day.
Great.
He's typing.
One more question. Yes. Yes, that was agreed. That was great, Karen. I think that it really provides insight into a process that a lot of people go through, but there's not a lot of information about how to do it. But everyone does it. Yes. So with that, I will thank Karen virtually, and we will put this up on our website that you can look at later. And with that, thank you very much, Karen.
Bye, guys. Good luck.